Hello to all the scary story lovers. My sister doesn't pick me up in the closet anymore. Someone else does it now. It all started about 3 weeks ago. Alisa and I have a classic sisterly relationship. Sometimes we're best friends. Sometimes we're ready to strangle each other. She's 17. I recently came home from university for summer break, and apparently she decided my life is too boring. Her new prank has become locking me in an old storage closet in the hallway. It's a narrow, dark closet full of things. The first time it was even funny. I was rummaging around in there looking for an old photo album, and she just came up and clicked the lock from the outside. I knocked, laughed, and she opened it a minute later. Haha. Very funny. But the second time it wasn't funny anymore. She locked me in again, but this time I heard sounds coming from behind the door. Some kind of nasty scraping, like someone scratching the wall with nails. Then a whisper. I immediately realized it was her. She has a speaker in her room, and she most likely connected to it from her phone and played something. But damn, in the complete darkness, in this cramped space, even such a stupid joke is scary. I started banging on the door. I was no longer laughing. Alice, open up. It's not funny. In response, only giggles and that scraping noise again. I sat there for about 10 minutes. And during that time my brain managed to create a couple of creepy pictures. When she finally opened the door, I flew out of there angry as hell. Are you completely insane? I yelled. Come on, she laughed. You should have seen your face. And my plan was much more elegant than stupidly locking me in the pantry. Revenge is a dish best served cold. I waited until the next day. Alice was taken away in her impunity, and acting as usual. I downloaded one of those spy apps onto her phone while it was charging. It disguised itself as a calculator, but actually gave me remote access to the microphone and speakers. Syncing it with her speaker took 5 minutes. Brilliant. Now I could not only listen to what was going on in her room, but also broadcast any sound there. And that evening, she was sitting in her room scrolling through social media. I lay in my room with my phone in hand, headphones in, and partook in the fun. To start, I simply unmuted the sound from her microphone. I could hear her snoring, scrolling through videos. Perfect. Time to begin. I found a recording of a quiet, barely audible female whisper online and turned it on at minimum volume. She quieted down and began to listen. I turned it off. A minute later, she started scrolling again. I turned it on again. This time a little louder. I heard her jump up through my headphones. She started looking around. She went to the window, closed it, and checked the door. I could barely contain my laughter. This was so much more powerful than her primitive scare ploys. I spent the next week scaring her, turning on the whisper at the most unexpected moments. Sometimes it was just sounds, quiet crying, footsteps on the floor, a creaking door. I never did it for long, just a few seconds, until she began to doubt her own sanity. She became twitchy, stopped sitting alone in the room in the evenings, and dragged her speaker into the kitchen. She no longer joked with me. I enjoyed ourselves for a couple more days, and then decided enough was enough. Lesson learned. I deleted the app from my phone, and erased it from hers. I turned off all syncing. The war was over. How wrong I was. The war was just beginning. A couple of days passed after I stopped my pranks. Visov was still quiet, and somehow dejected. One evening she came up to me, while I was watching TV in the kitchen. Vic, forgive me. Okay, she said quietly. For locking you out. That was stupid. Oh, never mind, I replied. Have you heard anything strange lately? My heart sank. Like? I asked as calmly as I could. Just like that. Someone whispers sometimes. I guess it's just my imagination. I'm tired. Okay. Forget it. She waved her hand and went to her room. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay there thinking that I had driven her paranoid. Now she hears rustling sounds everywhere. A feeling of guilt gnawed at me. I knew for sure that I had turned everything off. The app was deleted. The speaker was not connected. All was clear. It was at that moment, in complete silence, that I heard a soft whisper. It was not coming from my room. It was coming from the direction of the hallway. From her room. I froze, listening. The sound was different. Not the one I turned on. This one was real. I'm hallucinating already, I thought. But the next night, it all happened again. Only this time the whisper was louder. I couldn't make out the words. It was some kind of incoherent mumbling. I stood up and tiptoed to my door and opened it slightly. The sound was coming from Alice's room. It was not coming from where her speaker was. It was coming from the direction of her closet. I quickly closed the door. My heart was pounding like crazy. What the hell was this? Maybe she decided to play a prank on me in return. I installed something in the closet. The third night became a nightmare. I woke up again from that sound. I lay there, staring at the ceiling and trying not to breathe. The whispers died down, then started again, and suddenly they stopped. There was silence. I was already starting to think that it was all over. The end. I could sleep. Then an icy whisper was heard behind me. Vika. My body was paralyzed with horror. I just lay there, clutching the blanket, and staring into the darkness. I knew it wasn't Alice. I didn't sleep until the morning. As soon as the first rays of sun touched the window, I came running to the bed. All day I walked around in a daze. I was afraid of nightfall. In the evening I received a message from Alice, although we were in neighboring rooms. Can you hear that? What? Don't pretend. That whisper. It started again. Only now there is something else there. I listened and it was true. There goes someone, very slowly, rummaging through things in the closet. Clothes, boxes. They're looking for something. It's not me. I know. I checked the speaker. It's completely unplugged. Vika. I'm scared. Me too. We each sat in our own rooms, texting in complete silence, broken only by this eerie sound coming from the closet in her room. It got louder. Indeed, the rustling intensified. Now it sounded like someone scratching on wood from the inside. Go into the hallway. Now. I slipped out of my room. A second later, the door to her room opened slightly, and Alice appeared. Her face was pale, her eyes huge. We looked at each other in silence, and then at the closed door of her closet. The sound was coming from there. What is it? She whispered. Her voice trembled. I don't know. I answered in a whisper too. But we have to look. We approached her room. Every creak of the arched floor under our feet sounded like a gunshot. We stopped in front of the closet. The creaking whispers inside the humming died down, as if it sensed we were nearby. I looked at Alice. She nodded. I grabbed one handle, and she grabbed the other. On the count of 3, I whispered. 1, 2, 3. We opened the closet. It was dark and quiet inside. Old clothes, shoe boxes, some junk on the top shelf. Nothing. Absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. We stood there feeling like complete idiots. We must have just imagined it. Alice began. Suddenly she noticed that the lid of the cardboard shoebox was off. My hands went cold. I stood on the table next to me, and with trembling fingers pulled out the box. We sat on the floor in the hallway and opened it. Inside were dozens of photographs. Here we are at the DACA. Very little. Here we are in first grade, with huge bows. Here we are at birthday parties, with cake and candles. In all the photographs of Alisa and me, our faces were gone. They were erased, not cut out, not painted over. It was as if someone had rubbed them long and methodically with a wet finger until the paint came off. Just smeared ovals where our childish smiles used to be. We sat on the floor in complete silence. The whispering stopped. But we realized that this wasn't the end. We don't know what this creature is living in the closet. We don't know what it wants. But every night we hear it scurrying around there. I don't know what came back with me from the dacha. But it wasn't my wife. It all started last Saturday. My wife Yulia and I decided to head out to our dacha for the last warm weekend. Our dacha is old, left over from her grandfather, on the outskirts of the village, and beyond the fence, the forest begins right away. It's a bit secluded, but we liked it. It's tough. There's no one around. Saturday was great. And on Sunday morning, I woke up to a strange smell, like a pipe had burst in the basement. I sat up in bed. Yulia was still asleep. Nothing was visible outside the window. Usually the sun is out by this time. But here there was a murky gray wall. I went out onto the porch. Fog. But this was no ordinary morning fog. It was thick, gray-green, and it didn't hang in the air, but seemed to creep along the ground, clinging to the grass. I took a step and my feet immediately became wet. The air was heavy, and it was hard to breathe. The smell of mold became even stronger. I walked around the house, deathly silence. I couldn't even hear the birds, just my breathing and some barely perceptible smacking. The sound was coming from the forest, and then I noticed something crawling in the fog, right at the edge of the forest, about 50 meters away. They were huge, shapeless lumps, maybe a meter in diameter. They slid slowly along the ground like giant slugs. Their surface was damp, shiny, and also gray-green, and behind them they left shiny, wet tracks, like snails. Only these tracks were as wide as my leg. I looked closer and felt goosebumps run down my back. Something was moving faintly in these wet furrows on the ground. Some kind of larvae or worms, I don't know. They were wriggling in the slime left by these creatures, and I stood and watched, mesmerized, until one of these lumps separated from the group, and crawled straight toward our plot. "Yule, come here, quick," I whispered, backing up to the house. She usually came out onto the porch yawning. "What happened? What are you yelling about?" "Look," I pointed toward the forest. The lump of slime was slowly crawling toward our gate. It moved in jerks, contracting and stretching. The splashing sound was now clearly audible. Yulia squinted. "What is that? A trash bag blown by the wind? What bag? Look at it." At that moment, the thing stopped just a couple of meters from our fence. It stopped moving and seemed to freeze. Yulia and I froze too. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened, and then something began to form from the top of this lump. The slime gathered in folds, stretching upward, and then it appeared. A muzzle. My insides still clench when I remember it. I remember it. Pale, translucent, as if sculpted from cooled fat. It had no eyes, no nose, just a smooth surface. And then, right in the middle of that muzzle, a slit appeared. It immediately parted, turning into a huge wide mouth. Yulia screamed and grabbed my hand. I grabbed her and, dragging her into the house, slammed the door and turned the key. "What was that, God? What was that?" she said, clinging to me. "Quiet." I tried to calm her down. I ran to the window. The creature was still standing there. Its eyeless muzzle was turned straight towards our house. It was as if it were looking at us. We didn't talk. We just sat on the couch and listened. It was quiet outside. Only occasionally could I hear this disgusting squelching and rustling, as if something was crawling on the wet grass around our house. The fog didn't clear. It became even thicker. I tried to call 911, but there was no connection. The internet didn't work either. 4 hours passed. We sat in silence. Yulia seemed to have calmed down a bit. She just stared into space. "I need a car," she suddenly said. I looked at her like she was crazy. "Are you crazy? What car? I left my bag with my documents and wallet there. I need to get them. Who cares about the bag? We're not going anywhere while this crap is there. There's nothing there anymore." She shrugged her shoulders strangely and differently. It had been quiet for a long time. I quickly went there and back. All her fear had evaporated somewhere. This scared me even more. I tried to dissuade her, but she dug in her heels. She said I was panicking, that it was some kind of animal, maybe a sick elk or something, and that it had long since left. "Okay, but I'll go with you," I said. "No need. I'll do it myself." She opened the door and went outside. The fog was so thick that I could barely see the car. Yulia ran up to it, opened the door, grabbed her bag, and ran back. It all took about 20 seconds. When she ran into the house, I slammed the door. "Well, you see, it's okay," she said with a heavy heart. I looked at her feet. A streak of that same slime glistened on the sole of her sneaker. "Yulia, on your shoe." "Yes, I know. I stepped in some puddle." She waved her hand dismissively and went into the room. And that's when everything began to change. She became silent. She sat by the window and looked at the fog. She answered all my questions with difficulty. Yes. No. It's fine. She refused the food I prepared, said she wasn't hungry, but she kept drinking water, glass after glass. I'd never seen her drink so much. Towards evening I noticed that her skin had become somehow different, pale, and seemingly damp in appearance. I asked if she was feeling okay. She turned to me, and I saw her eyes. They were empty, as if you were looking at 200 knuckles. Everything is fine, she answered in an even voice. I became truly scared, scarier than when I saw that creature in the fog. Get ready, I said, grabbing the car keys. We're leaving, right now. She didn't argue, just nodded silently, stood up and walked to the door. The drive home was a nightmare. 2 hours in almost complete silence. She sat absolutely still. She didn't even blink. At some point I started convincing myself that I was just crazy, that I was overwhelmed, worked myself up, and Yulia was simply shocked by what she saw. Okay, she's acting weird. But who wouldn't act weird after something like that? At home, we silently unpacked our things. I offered to order pizza. Yulia declined, said she wanted a shower. She stayed there for almost an hour. I could hear the water running constantly. When she came out, she was wearing my robe. Her hair was wet. She took a glass, poured water from the tap, and drank it in one gulp. Then she poured a second one. Yul, are you sure you're okay? You're scaring me, I said. She put the glass on the table, and slowly turned to face me. Her face was emotionless. I'm hungry, she said in the same even voice. But I offered pizza. I started, but didn't finish. She looked at me, and I saw her face change. The skin on her cheeks and chin rippled like water. Her mouth, it began to open, not like a human's. Her jaw dropped, then to the side, with a soft wet click. The skin stretched. The mouth grew wider and wider, much wider than was physically possible. It stretched into a huge, dark, wet hole, almost from ear to ear. I recoiled, knocked over the chair, fell to the floor, and from the floor to the wall. The creature that looked like my wife stood in the middle of the kitchen, its mouth unnaturally open, just staring at me. And now I'm sitting here, in the bedroom, with the door locked. I'm writing this on my phone. I don't know what this creature is, but it looks like Yulia, walks like Yulia, and even speaks with her voice. But it's not her, and I hear her moving around the apartment. Not footsteps, but that same quiet, wet squelching. She's waiting. I work as a night security guard at a shopping center. The monitors are showing things that shouldn't be. They're looking at me right now. Okay, I'll start from the beginning. My name is Dima. I'm 20. For a year now, I've been working as a night security guard at the huge Galactica shopping center, a typical glass and concrete coffin in a residential area. During the day, there's that hum, like in Yulia. And at night, a ringing silence. Only the refrigerators in the supermarket on the ground floor hum, all the way to the ventilation somewhere under the ceiling. It's a no-man's land job. You sit in your little cubicle, which we call an aquarium, staring at 32 monitors, and making your rounds every 2 hours. My shift starts at 10 p.m., when the last cleaner goes home. I'm left alone in the entire mall. Last night started like any other. I made myself some coffee, turned on a podcast on my phone, and braced myself for 8 hours of boredom. It was 7. I idly glanced at the monitors. Cell 0.4. Main entrance empty. Cell 12. Food court empty. Camera 21. The children's entertainment center with those ugly plastic slides is empty. Everything is as usual. And then I return to camera 0. Someone is standing at the main entrance, right in front of the sliding doors. My first thought is that he's a homeless guy or some drunk. He's simply standing with his back to the camera, looking out onto the street. The quality of the cameras is so-so, especially at night, so the image is grainy. Just a dark silhouette. I clicked on the other cameras. Everything is clear, except for this guy at the entrance. I decided to wait. Maybe it was just some kind of interference. A dead pixel the size of a person. An hour had passed. I had already begun to forget about him, carried away by YouTube videos. 0.28. I look at monitor 0.4 again. The silhouette has disappeared. I leaned back on the table and took a long sip of cold coffee. And at that moment, my mind thawed behind monitor 0.9. The central hall, the fountain, and the panoramic elevators. He was standing there. A cold sweat broke out on me. This wasn't Glitch anymore. Glitch wasn't moving around the mall. He was standing just as motionless, facing the elevator doors, as if he were waiting for it. But the elevators are also turned off at night. I grabbed the mouse and began frantically rewinding the footage from camera 0. There he was, standing at the entrance. And then the image jerked for a second, and he simply disappeared. He didn't go away, didn't dissolve. He just vanished from the frame. I immediately opened the footage from cameras, and sure enough, the same second he disappeared at the entrance, he appeared at the elevator. Like in a cheap horror movie. It became creepy. This wasn't human. A human couldn't move like that. What the hell was going on? I locked the door to my aquarium with an extra lock, glass walls, but it was calmer this way. I set up the monitors again. Still Eddie was also standing by the elevator. I didn't take my eyes off him for almost an hour. He didn't move. I was starting to think I was nuts. After all, I'd been sitting there tensely for an hour, waiting for him to disappear again and reappear somewhere else. The wildest theories raced through my head. A ghost, some kind of anomaly, delirium. So I decided to make my rounds. Protocol required it. And anyway, I hadn't been sitting still for long. I needed to stretch my legs and make sure everything was quiet in the building itself. The silence in the Tetsi was deafening. The emergency lights picked out lifeless mannequins in the darkness. Some of them seemed to be watching me. I tried not to look at them. I reached the central hall. My heart was pounding. I cautiously peered around the corner. Empty. Zintiel. There was no one at the elevator. I felt both relief and even greater fear. I walked the entire route, shining the flashlight into dark corners and checking the doors. Everything was locked. Everything was in place. Not a trace. Not a sound. I returned to my aquarium, almost calmed. It's all Dima, I told myself. Stop worrying. Tell the engineers in the morning. Let them check the system. I took a chair and looked at the monitors. I almost screamed. Now he was on camera 01. Camera 01 was pointed directly at my glass booth. He was standing 10 meters away from me, right behind the glass. He was looking at me. I say looked. But he had no face. Just a dark blurry spot where his head should be. I froze. My brain refused to reconcile reality and the image on the monitor. On the monitor, he was standing and watching. But I was sitting in this booth. Between us there were only 10 meters of empty corridor and glass. I very slowly raised my head to the monitors and looked forward through the real glass. No one. The corridor was empty. The same dim light. No silhouette. I began to have a quiet hysteria. I'm going crazy. This is the only explanation. I looked back at the monitor. He was there. He didn't disappear. He stood there, watching. The image on the screen didn't match reality. And then he did something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. He slowly raised his hand. He waved at me again. 4:55. I sat huddled in my chair, unable to tear my eyes away from the monitor. I decided that in the morning I would write my resignation and never again be alone in this damned place. I had to somehow survive until morning. There were still a few hours left before shift change. I tried to convince myself this wasn't real, that it was some kind of digital anomaly, a virus generating this image. Yes, exactly. It was a virus. It had somehow gained access to the cameras and was now trolling the poor night guard. It sounded crazy, but it was better than thinking about a ghost. To prove to myself it was just a glitch, I decided to do one last check. I'd rewind the recording a few minutes back and look at it all from a distance. I'd see me sitting there, looking into the empty hallway, while this silhouette stood in the image from camera 0. This would be proof of a system failure. I'd show this video to the engineers and they'd fix everything. My hands were shaking as I fiddled with the mouse. I opened the recording archive. I selected camera 01. I rewinded 5 minutes back and pressed play. My cubicle appeared on the screen. Here I am, gripping the armrests. A dark figure stands behind the glass in the hallway. Everything is just as I remember. I am looking at the monitor in the recording. Then I slowly raise my head in the recording to look out the real window. And at that moment, that very second when I am looking into the empty hallway on the screen, the silhouette in the recording twitches. It doesn't disappear. It passes through the glass and appears inside my booth. And I am looking forward in the recording, into the hallway, and something like relief appears on my face. Then I decided that I had imagined the whole thing. And the silhouette, it is standing right behind my chair. I stare at the recording, mesmerized. My double on the screen lowers his eyes back to the monitor. He doesn't know it yet, but I already know. I am watching the recording from 5 minutes ago, which shows this creature entering my booth. And then it dawns on me. This is not a recording. And I turn my gaze to the timecode in the corner of the screen. This is a live broadcast. I did not rewind the recording, and by mistake, I didn't open the archive, but simply brought up the image from the camera that hangs from the ceiling in my closet. Camera 32, the one I never look at. I look at the monitor. It shows a view from above. It shows me, sitting in a chair with my back to the door. My face is pale, my eyes wide. I look at another monitor, where it seems to be recording, and right behind my chair stands a dark, blurry silhouette. Camera 32 is still recording. I see myself from the outside. I see my fingers trembling. The figure behind me doesn't move. He just stands there and stares at the back of my head. I sit absolutely still. I'm afraid to turn around, because I know that if I turn around I'll see him, no longer on the screen. And I don't know what's scarier, seeing him or continuing to look at the monitor where this creature is standing behind me, patiently waiting for me to gather the courage to look at him. As a child I often woke up at night to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water, and every time I saw the same picture. My father was sitting in his old armchair in the living room. He wasn't watching TV or reading. He was simply sitting in the semi-darkness and looking towards the corridor that led to the basement. At first I thought he was just insomniac. But adults do. I would quietly walk past, he would watch me go, nod, and I would go back to bed. But over time I began to notice strange things. Sometimes when I would freeze around the corner I would hear him whispering. It was an indistinct, quiet whisper, as if he were talking to someone, but there was no one in the room. I listened. It was coaxing. Something like, "It's not time yet. You know you can't. Be patient." It scared the hell out of me. Who was he talking to? A ghost. With himself. One day as I was passing by I asked him, "Dad, why aren't you sleeping?" He slowly turned his head. "I can't, honey. We have to keep an eye on you." "Watch who? Us?" He chuckled slightly. "Yes. Us. Go to sleep, darling." I left, but his answer didn't calm me down. On the contrary, a feeling of anxiety settled over me for many years. I knew he wasn't just watching us. He was waiting for something. Or someone. Every night without fail. Years passed, I became a teenager. From the oddity, having my father became the norm for us. Mom never talked about it. She would just make him a thermos of coffee at night, put a plate of sandwiches next to him, and leave silently, as if it were his job, his night shift. But I wanted to know the truth. One evening when my father had already taken up his post at the cross, I approached my mother in the kitchen. She was washing the dishes. "Mom, why doesn't Dad ever sleep?" I asked Boss bluntly. She froze for a second and then went back to scrubbing the plate. "That's his job, honey." "What job?" "Sitting at the cross and staring at the wall." "Who does he talk to at night?" Mom turned off the water and turned to me. Her face was as haggard as father's. "He's protecting us," she said quietly. "Protecting us? From whom? From burglars? Why don't we call the police?" "They're not burglars." She shook her head. "There are things the police can't handle. Your father is a very strong man. He has everything under control. Just don't bother him. Okay? And never ever go to the basement door at night." Her voice sent a chill down her spine. The basement door. His gaze was always fixed there. An ordinary wooden door, painted white. On it hung an old barn bolt. which father removed every evening before sitting in his chair. We never used that basement. Father said it was full of rats. Now I understood. He wasn't looking at the wall. He was looking at the door. He wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to whatever was behind that door. From that night on, I couldn't sleep peacefully. I lay in bed, listening to every rustle of my father's monotonous whisper from the living room, and it seemed to me that sometimes, very, very quietly, from behind the door in the basement, someone was answering him. I turned 18. I was getting ready to leave for another city, to go to university, and I wanted to know the truth. Around 2 in the morning, I went downstairs. My father was at his post, as always. A thermos, an empty cup, a motionless silhouette. I sat on the floor next to his chair. We were silent for a long time. I'm leaving, Dad, tomorrow, I finally said. I know. You'll tell me before I leave. I need to know what's been going on here, all these years. He sighed heavily. You're an adult now, he said hoarsely. You probably have a right to know. He paused, collecting his thoughts. When we bought this house, the basement was sealed. The previous owners muttered something about groundwater, about mold. I opened it and found her there. Her who? I don't know what it is. It looks almost like a person, but it's not a person. It was bound with some old chains. It said it was locked here many years ago. Said its name was the same as your great-grandmother, whom I never met. The hair on the back of my neck started to stand on end. It asked to be let out. Its voice was convincing, plaintive. I almost believed it. But something stopped me. Some kind of sixth sense. I locked the door and decided to think until the morning. And at night it started to crawl out. Father rubbed his face with his palms. It can't break down the door, but it can drive you crazy. The first night it came to me in a dream. Showed me such things that I woke up with gray hair at my temples. I understood. If I fall asleep, it takes over my mind. It will get out, using us. I sat there numb with horror. And what did you do? I stopped sleeping. Father answered simply. And I can talk to her. Convince her that she won't like the world above. Threaten her. Every night is a battle. A battle to keep this door closed. And our family safe. And I keep it locked with my mind. Now I understand everything. His tiredness. His whispers. Mom's fear. But how did you manage to stay awake for so many years? I sleep, sometimes, during the day, for an hour or an hour and a half, while you're at school, and Mom's at work. When the house is noisy, sunlight weakens it. But at night it's strongest. And I have to be here. He looked at me. And for the first time in many years I saw in his eyes not only fatigue, but also boundless paternal love. I'm doing this for you, Mother. So that you can live. So that you can live. So that you have a future. I hugged him. And tears streamed down my eyes. 5 years had passed. I graduated from university. Found a job. Lived my life. But every call home was accompanied by the same question. How is Dad? And the answer was always the same. He's holding up. Everything is fine. Everything is the same. I came to visit them for the weekend. The house seemed smaller than when I was a child. My parents had aged, especially my father, but he still sat in his chair every night. That Saturday we stayed up late having dinner. We remembered funny stories. We looked at old photographs. For the first time in a long time, I saw my father smile. I guess that's what lulled me to sleep. I felt like a little girl again, completely safe. I woke up around 3 in the morning, not from the noise, but rather from the silence, an oppressive, completely unnatural silence. There was no father's usual whisper in it. My heart started pounding. I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed into the living room. The armchair was empty. A cold sweat broke out. I peered into my parents' bedroom. They were there, both of them. Mom was sleeping on her side, and Dad was sleeping next to me. For the first time in almost 30 years, he slept through the night. At first I felt relief. Maybe it was over. Maybe it was gone. He could finally rest. And then my gaze fell on the hallway, the door to the basement. It was slightly open. I stood in the middle of the hallway, looking at that black gap, and it felt like it was looking at me. I slowly backed away toward my parents' bedroom. I needed to wake them both up. We had to get out of here, right now. I was almost to their door, and suddenly, a voice came from the slightly open basement door. It was my mother's voice. Quiet, gentle, caring. The same voice she used to wake me up for school. Honey. I froze. My brain refused to believe it. I just saw her. She was sleeping in her bed a few meters away from me. Darling. Come here. The voice called from the darkness. I think I fell and twisted my ankle. Help me, please. It's so dark in here. I slowly turned my head toward my parents' bedroom. The door was closed, but I saw 2 figures lying on the bed. My mother was there. She was sleeping, and the voice from the basement kept calling me. Come on. Don't be afraid, honey. It's me, your mother. I'm in pain. Come to me. I stood in the hallway of my childhood, between my bedroom and the open door to hell. It came out. It was here, and it was the end. Help me. Daughter, daughter, daughter.